And talking about this culture that Aaron was talking about of trying to learn and willing to take risks. So I have a question from Martha. If you built a new school today and had to start at the beginning with early learners and elementary, what are the first steps you would take to ingrain a STEM program into the culture of the school? Aaron, you were talking about getting that culture of willing to take risks and experiment and bring in new people. So maybe you can continue with that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, if you got to start a brand new space, that is so fascinating, exciting, because you actually can build a culture from the ground up, which I think that's a lot of the battles I think a lot of people face. You already have a culture or a system in place when you get to work in a school, you know, and you're trying to kind of break down some of those barriers if they're not what you agree with. But in a brand new space, you have a wide open opportunity. You know, one is this, looking at the layout of your space. Do you have a space that's going to allow for, you know, creativity and problem solving, and, you know, the flexible seating and all the things that are the current buzzwords of education and business, you know, and what I think sometimes often gets neglected in these conversations is asking the kids. You know, we look at designing, especially if you're looking at preschool and kindergarten and young level kids, we're looking at it from an adult perspective. Obviously, maybe we have a little bit more, you know, we have the research and things to read into, but I always think we always look at the classroom from a, you know, in my case, a 6'4" view. Bring the little guys in. You know, my 6-year-old daughter sees a space differently than me. As I'm building my nonprofit now, I'm like, what do you think? You know, and listen to those voices. I know that's cheesy of an answer, but I think there's a real power in that. You know, where would you put this? How would you work? And start to sample those things. I know that takes time, but I think making sure that we have equity of voice. It doesn't mean you always have to listen to everything, but, you know, but bring in the parents, bring in the different people to see how we can start to create these spaces to allow STEM education to take hold. You know, if you look in a typical classroom, you know, as much as we try to break the molds, desks are still in rows. They're tight rooms. There's things all over the shelves. There's not a whole lot to really push the boundaries of STEM education and learning. And so we have to start to relook at how we do these things, you know, and just trying to bring things down to their level. And you know, if you want to get down that curriculum level, it's that vertical articulation. Where do you start to expose some ideas, where it is play and explore, and you keep building into deeper issues as they kind of progress through their learning patterns. And there's a lot of different things. I mean, you could completely change the whole route of, do you have to go through grade levels, or can you progress based on your actual skills and knowledge? And now we're talking goofy talk now, because that usually scares a lot of people away. But I think the possibilities are endless there. But I think starting with the space and creating an atmosphere that allows a culture to actually start to grow and build this STEM thinking.
Thank you. Definitely.
Yeah, building on what Aaron mentioned about space is really, if you're starting from scratch, do you need a front of your classroom? That's based in the idea of the lecture, which predates the printing press. And so we've kind of, you know, maybe we don't know how students learn yet, but we know that lecturing is probably the worst way of transmitting knowledge. So getting rid of that front in classroom, if you look at on the university level, they're doing a lot of things they call studio science or studio physics, that they don't have a front of the classroom. There's every wall is a whiteboard, and they either use that paint on whiteboard paint, and when the students are going to work on a problem, every wall becomes a workspace, and the teacher can just walk from wall to wall, and everybody can see what everyone else is doing. So that's probably one key thing, is really getting rid of that idea is that there's a front and that there's one person to focus on. And what can you do to make that space more of a collaborative discussion, hands-on space, as opposed to the traditional lecture-based space?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And actually, I want to jump in here and talk about CoderZ for a second, because it fits very nicely with that model. There's no frontal lecture. It's every student with their robot programming it, talking about their code, getting feedback, and so that's a nice tie in there. Meredith, did you want to also try and answer the question?
Yeah, I'll just tag in. I mean, agreeing with lots of stuff that Aaron and Gary said. I mean, I think bringing in two perspectives, one, in our work here, we work with a lot of elementary teachers, who are trying to do this in the elementary level. And on one hand, right, kids are kind of naturally already there, right? They're ready to build and create and design. But if you were starting all over, right, you have to realize that has to go throughout the whole school, right? It can't just be in the STEM classroom, right? Because kids really quickly start to figure out, the game of school, and that you have, that here is where you just, do what the teacher wants, and here is where you have ideas. So I think if you're starting over, you have to think, as Aaron said earlier, about breaking down those silos and getting the whole school on board with, what you want kids to do, not only in STEM, but in the arts, in their other subjects there. And I'll point folks to one of my favorite examples, is the High Tech High group out in San Diego has done some really neat things, and they're at the high school level of kind of breaking down silos and having this project-based work. And they've also started launching some elementary schools, one of which my dear friend Ann Morrill runs, and is trying to bring in these ideas of engineering and robotics. So they don't have all the answers, right, because nobody does, but I point folks to them to look at some of the things they've done, and they have very public displays of their work, so you can see a lot of what the kids do, and think about elementary school in a different model.